Welcome back to my channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to master one of the most fundamental concepts in Python programming, which is getting input from users. Now you might be thinking, why is user input so important? Well, imagine building a calculator that can only add 2 plus 3, or a game that never asks for your name. Pretty boring, right? That's where the input function comes in. It's what makes your program interactive and dynamic. These are the topics that we'll cover in this video. We'll learn basic input function, covering input types, input validation, handling multiple inputs, best practices, and avoid the common mistakes programmers make. Alright, let's start with the basic input operation. The input function in Python is incredibly simple, but incredibly powerful. Let me show you how. The most important operation is to create a variable that will hold the value that is going to be input by the user. Let's create a variable called name. Then simply call that input function. Let's try and run this. Now, since I'm using Jupyter Notebook here, the code execution shows a blank input box area. This indicates that the program is waiting for input. Okay, let's give it an input. If you use other code editor or IDE such as PyCharm, Visual Studio Code, etc., you might probably see a blank screen in the code execution area. This can be confusing to the user because there is no instruction or message being displayed to the screen. This is where you need to add a prompt in the input function. Here, I'm writing "What's your name?" Let's run it again. Now, notice there is no space right after the question mark. We better modify it later. Just type in the input for this particular execution. So let's modify the prompt again to include space at the end. This is to make sure the output of our code looks neat and organized. Whatever the input provided by the user, it will be stored in the variable called name. Alright, so far we are just prompting for an input from the user. We need to display the value that the user has just typed in. So we print hello plus the name. What we are doing here is we are concatenating or combining the string hello with whatever the user typed, which is stored in our name variable. Let's run this. The program is waiting for my input. I'll type John. Perfect. It says hello John. This is the foundation of user interaction in Python. The program pauses, waits for the user to type something and press enter, then stores the input in our variable. One important thing to remember, the input function always returns a string. Even if the user types numbers, Python treats it as a text. Let me show you why this matters. And this brings us to the next topic, converting input types. Let's build a simple age calculator. First, I'll give the user's birth year. I'm also printing the type using type function to show what Python thinks this variable is. Let's run it. I'll enter 1990 and look, it says class str. That's a string. Even though I typed a number, Python stored it as text. Now, if I want to calculate someone's age, I need to do math, but you cannot subtract strings. Let me show you what happens. Let's include the line to calculate the age by subtracting the birth year with the year 2025. Let's run this and enter 1990. See that error? Type error, unsupported operand types for int and str. Python is telling us we cannot subtract a string from a number. The solution is to convert the string to an integer using the int function. Watch this. I'll enter 1990. Perfect. The program successfully calculated the age. Now notice we only show 35. It doesn't look nice, right? Let's modify the print function to include UR plus, then I'm using str function to convert the age back to a string for printing, then plus years old. Let's run again. Now the output looks even better. Alternatively, I could use an f string for printing, which is cleaner. Let's test it. Perfect. Both of the print statements print the same output, but an f string printing style looks clean and simple. Let's move on to input validation. Now, here's the thing. Users don't always behave the way we expect. What happens if someone enters ABC instead of year? Let's see. We got error. Value error, invalid literal for int with base 10, ABC. Our program crashes. This is where input validation becomes crucial. Okay, this looks more complex, but let me break it down. I'm using while true loop, which means keep doing this forever until I say stop. Inside the loop, I'm using try and except. This is called exception handling. The try block attempts to convert the input to an integer. If it succeeds, we break out of the loop. If it fails, if the user enters something like ABC, Python raises a value error which our except block catches. Instead of crashing, we print a helpful message and ask again. Let's test this. I'll enter ABC. Great. It says, please enter a valid year, and ask again. Now, let's say I accidentally entered a character X after the number 1990. See that? It again asks me to enter a valid year. Okay, for now, I'll enter 1990. Perfect. The program works correctly. Here, I'm adding even more validation. I'm checking if the age is negative or unrealistically high. The continue statement means go back to the beginning of the loop and try again. For now, don't worry about the if, continue and break. We will touch on this in other tutorials. Let's try this. First, I'll enter -23 and see. The if statement here catches the age entry and displays the age cannot be negative. The continue statement will make the program jump back to the beginning of the loop and ask for the input again at this line. Here, I'll enter 155, and this time around, this if statement catches the age entry and this displays please enter a realistic age. The continue statement again make the program jump back to the beginning of the loop and ask for the input again. Here, I will enter 35 with a character A. This time around, value error exception handling is taking care of the input because the program is expecting a number to be entered, but the input was 35A. The conversion of 35A at this location is the one that causes the value error exception handling to occur. That's why we are presented with please enter a valid number. Now the program is asking an input again. This time around, we will enter a valid number. Next up, we learn how to handle multiple input. Sometimes you need to get multiple pieces of information from the user. Let me show you a few different approaches. This is the straightforward approach. Separate input calls for each piece of information. First, we ask for the first name, then the last name, then the age. Since input for age is a number, it is the best practice to convert it to integer. It can later be useful if you want to do mathematical operation with the age variable later in program. This method of getting separate input calls is clean and readable. Let me run this. I'll type John Doe 25. And here you go. Hello John Doe, you are 25 years old. Perfect. Here I'm using the split method, which divides a string that you get from the input into a list wherever it finds spaces. Let's test entering John Doe, and the output is hello John Doe. Great, but how does it work? Here, John Doe becomes a list of John Doe in the list variable called full name. Then I can access each part of the full name list using index number 0 and 1. Don't worry about list at the moment, we'll cover it in other tutorial. This version still uses split function, but with an extra feature. It uses tuple unpacking. Python automatically assigns the first part to first name and the second part to last name. If the user doesn't enter exactly 2 words, we get a value error, which we handle gracefully. Before we wrap up, let me share some best practices that will make your code more professional. Notice how I've wrapped the validation logic in functions. For now, let's not get confused about functions. I'll teach you how to create functions in other tutorials. Using functions makes the code reusable and easier to test. I'm also using strip function to remove white space from the name input. The reason for this is that users often accidentally add spaces while typing for input. The function names are descriptive. I've added docstrings to explain what each function does. Let me quickly show you the most common mistakes beginners make. Mistake number 1, beginners always forget to convert types. Remember, whatever the input captured by the input function is a string. So if you try to do any mathematical operation with the age here, you will definitely get an error. How to correct it? Simply convert the input into integer or float. Mistake number 2, Most beginners rarely handle user input carefully, like this example. The program is expecting a number, but sometimes most users tend to make a mistake when entering an input. How to correct it? Always validate using exception handling. Mistake number 3, forgetting the space in prompts. Although this is not an error, but your program output may not look nice and professional. Correcting it is as simple as adding a space. This might seem small, but they make a huge difference in user experience. And there you have it. You now know how to get user input in Python like a pro. We covered the basic input operation, type conversion, validation, handling multiple inputs, and best practices. Remember, always validate user input, convert types when needed, and provide clear prompts. Your users will thank you for it. If you found this tutorial helpful, hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss any new Python tutorials. Until then, keep coding, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.